What?
A friend of mine wanted to buy
Is
it.
he? Oh, I didn't see it.
No, yeah, just hiding right behind you. So I'm hooked to the Wi-Fi on the ship, so yeah. So and the TV is pretty loud, so I don't think we'll need to worry about the sound bar yet.
Run and get it? Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll be good.
Oh, good. And you think we'll just set it up there?
Yeah, if we can clear the
It
stuff
can
off.
go off to the side,
Yeah.
wherever you think.
Yeah, once the speakers are all done, I'll just bring the TV over here and then we should begin.
Did you meet Paul?
No.
This is Steve. Steve is our other technical
I'm Steve
person.
Rossi. How you
He's
doing?
helping us with the live stream for the. Yeah, it's watching the live stream. So Paul is actually live streaming this event to his channel.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Nice. Yeah, we're ready when you are, I think. Oh yeah, they're all really enjoying that TV over there. That's true.
They set it up pretty much how I thought they were going to set it up.
They did, and I came in at 1:30, I was already set up. Well, they must have listened, that's exactly what their diagram said.
Yeah, I didn't know about the lecture. I thought, oh, you might want a lecture.
We were running into that. But we decided we didn't know.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't work. Yeah.
But it's a beautiful life.
It is a beautiful lecture, yeah.
I'm gonna tell these guys here.
All right.
But that made
Yeah.
And he went on down to get the books for the and he came back and he said, because the alarm, it was on the ground, busted up, and the fan was.
Yeah, I came down and I was gonna take a picture of this.
And she said she got.
I'm Steve, by the way.
How was it working, by the way?
He's ready.
I thought he was.
You want to write again, I just want to share with you.
Oh, thank you. Issues, different things are supposed to be.
So, what's Steve's last name, don't? Yeah. Snyder's not.
You know I'm an idiot.
What?
So next to the prop my business.
Got it, so that I went sign it and I freaking forgot it.
Oh, yeah, I know how those.
And I realized it was like in Santa Clarita.
I'm glad that, you know,
I got one. No, the fan. But all the stuff I haven't read, you know, I read a book this. They brought us up a new thing. Debunking the whole that they switched the Olympic. Oh, and last night, and there were some people that were, some young girls were really well. And they started I'm sitting up reading through some stuff, and the lights were going off 6 times. Yeah. And I thought maybe the ship was working. Yeah, that's what. Right where you went. It was only in one spot.
the Bible for the ship. It's the Queen Mary's Bible. It's the Bible. Anything you really wanted to know about the original construction.
And then if you think about the Titanic, it's an anomaly that
How did you get interested in, how did you like come to really like just Facebook? Yeah. I saw it, I saw an upload alright. Seems like I was thinking
History. Oh, nice. And then
nothing bad happened.
nothing bad happened for a long time.
Since I was about 8 or 9 when
The guy called Lynch came out. He talks about she's lining up. This car wasn't inspected right.
I'm not that. I haven't seen
line up for
my parents saw like right after they got I was first young.
like 2005, about 6 or 7.
Yeah, so I wasn't around for that. So I watched it growing up.
And when you make a reservation, I'm sorry. I do food checks, whatever is under my name. I have to log out to make sure
Some of
something.
it is a joke in my opinion.
Oh, I totally
I'm pretty sure that
the 53 movie.
they should have that kind of, be able to see who made the reservation.
That one. A lot of the documentaries now.
There have been other, like almost disasters. Radio.
Very few seem to go like, how would you say,
Well researched.
yeah.
No, it's just like they maybe like, they saw the well, like I just like the 1997 or like you know what you're looking for. It's just really
Just as conversation and
accurate.
it's science, whatever.
like talking to Don Lynch.
Queen Mary.
Oh yeah, especially because he's like the only person alive. He's not the only person, but he's
And at that time, that was before I remember.
I got dinner at 8.
Unfortunately, some of us alive. Yeah, won't have that direct connection with where all these
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's kind of like, when you got an extra space, I'm like,
It's for two, and I couldn't make it one, so I just because I'm here.
here by yourself?
Yeah. Mary was.
You can just like without survivor. Things can get real crazy.
Yeah, Nelson is
He said nothing reminders for the tragedy.
So I heard we got some two skippers that were on the move.
I think we're almost ready.
I just know they were doing something.
Well, that's we
They were here.
Who else?
And so he freaked out.
I was
Another tip.
yeah.
I should have given him a call.
Then they told us in the gift shop that it was normal, that they were all gone, he didn't have any. And
How
then
did that
there was
go?
only one gift shop, there was little items and stuff, and it was up on a shelf. So, it was not cheap, but, boy, it was sweet. So that's how she agrees.
So you said you were born in 2005, right?
Yeah.
My sister's birthday is October 10th.
Mine's May 2nd.
I'm so, no, I told him earlier.
Between tours.
I told him earlier, I said, you gotta come.
Yeah, he said I would try it. And actually, Connor Everett's gonna try it.
I've been talking to him for about half an hour. He's so cool.
He's such a nice guy.
That's good.
Yeah.
As soon as they're done chit-chatting.
I think I'll probably just go back.
I went to Mary for Mike's birthday.
Ah, see, I couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's not gonna be a thing, it's like, I'm looking at my work, but not as like,
Yeah, they just like round up.
yeah, but I mean, like, compared to house, it looks amazing. But I mean, like, there's not much like.
Well, I started out my career a long time ago writing software, so software engineer, but now I buy somebody else's software.
I go to Cal State.
Help them set it up and help them figure it out.
Rena?
Okay, that's
Cambridge. A little bit, not too much. I don't
Because I
remember.
just started,
Yeah, I don't remember.
or for the movie, I didn't have any daughters, I didn't want to wait in the 6
No, I got a volunteer. I got a
There was
volunteer.
a man at Cinemark that,
the grocery store.
he turned out okay.
There isn't, but there's a Target.
It's got a lot of ships.
And that's where I go.
The shopping for me was like I mean, I think that would be a cost.
There might be, I don't know, I'm not a member, so I don't know.
Alright,
My grandparents, like,
Oh, so she could go
my
on?
uncle thinks my grandma.
Ellen left for a second, so
Every day, they'll be there for like a while.
There's no boundaries.
They're paying more for the membership at that point.
I've been 17 years with this particular company, like for that's kind of short.
My mom was Pakistan, she takes us to get our eyes checked at hospital.
Relations are all good.
I can get glasses over. They came down and somewhere down
I appreciate it.
Oh, no, it is good.
Well, I don't know, but.
I think I pretty close how
I mean, it's been travel beaches. It's like, why don't you just divide it two ways? That's not how it works. Or I guess, I did try that, I did try it.
it's really complicated. I can't follow that.
There she is. I guess I'm ready to have her. I don't know. All right, well,
There you go. We have a bunch of homes, I don't know.
I think like the argument from their side is like, you know, they basically like,
I could have brought lots of little stuff.
it was like after World War II,
I think we'll get started if everybody's ready. Is everybody ready? Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Carganilla. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Jill Carlier, for inviting me to be a part of this amazing weekend. It is truly an honor, so thank you so much. Just a quick, brief thing. Who's this guy? Why does he have a mic in his hand? I was an entertainer for many years. I worked for the Disney parks as an event host, MC, for 15 years in Disneyland California Adventure. A number of roles. Aladdin's Genie, Green Army Man, the Sheriff of Frontierland, a pirate. So I had a lot of time on stage and hosting events, and I'm now working for the government in like a social media PR role. But my hobby is still independent filmmaking, and I run a podcast. And through the podcast, I have met so many wonderful people. I'm the type of person that just always follow my heart. I always ask if I can get involved, and you know, doors open, I think, when you do that in life. And I'm so thrilled to be here. This last May, for our anniversary, my beautiful wife Jamie surprised me, this is a crazy story, with a piece from the film Titanic, the 1997, James Cameron. It's actually the wheel, the wrought iron capstan wheel that Kate stops at before she makes the decision to jump it off the back of the ship. And totally blew my mind, but with all the documentation that came with it, the previous owner had written Judy Prestininzi's name all over it, Don Lynch's name all over it, and I was like, I want to get in contact with these people and see, you know, if they actually had any hand in this. And I got in contact with them through social media, and Judy and Don are like, yeah, I know the guy, but I had nothing to do with this wheel. And I'm like, okay, cool, but would you come on my podcast? And so they've both been guests on my podcast. So it's just been a crazy whirlwind to bring me here today. And again, thank you, Jill, for inviting me to be a part of this. We're just gonna have a conversation. We're hanging out, we're live streaming. If anybody has any questions that come up throughout the conversation today, put it in your pocket. We're gonna get to the questions. And anybody out there watching on YouTube, share the link with anybody you think might want to join us virtually here in the room for this. And of course, drop any questions in the live chat as you have them. I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll just get everybody's energy in this room. I love it. Our first speaker, of course, needs no introduction, so how much should I give him? I mean,
It's a small group here.
ladies and gentlemen, Don Lynch, Don Lynch.
This?
Yeah, do you want to stand? Do you want a mic stand?
No, I can stand.
Oh,
If you can stand it, I can stand. So I'm just gonna talk for a few minutes, and then I figured we'd get everybody, so we'd have more time for Q&A or whatever. But I was asked to speak about the books and everything, and of course, the first one was Titanic and Illustrated History. And the way it came about, in my memory, and is that, you know, after Robert Ballard's book came out, it was a million bestseller and everything else, Ken Marshall went to the publishers and said, you know, you really should do a book that really covers the whole Titanic story from inception to current day. And they were like, no, 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 Titanic's been done to death. Ballard's book sold 1 million some copies, however, you know, it's been done. And so anyway, then our editor, Hugh Brewster, said, you know, went to some bookseller conventions and people kept saying to them, when are you going to do your next Titanic book? So next thing you know, they come back and now it's, you know, their idea to do a book. So I have to give credit to Ken, whether the people from Madison Press like it or not. And so, you know, we went to work on that, and I was asked to be the author for the text as the historian for the Titanic Historical Society, having done a lot of research. And I was hoping to do my own book one day anyway, and so this sort of just flowed into that. And then Ken did the illustrations, and he did some new ones that were commissioned for it and everything. And so, you know, it came out, you know, back in the day, 1992, a few years ago. And so it did well, you know, it did fine. And I probably went to second printer, same thing, I can't remember. But then, of course, along comes the movie. And unbeknownst to us, James Cameron has used our book to pitch the movie to Fox. And, you know, and get the green light. He basically laid down, I will admit it was the pictures, it wasn't, you know, the text. He didn't say, read this, you know, he said, you know, to Peter Turner, he pushed it at him and said, look at this, and he just says, I'm going to put this on the big screen. And he said, and he did say, I'm going to make it Romeo and Juliet on the Titanic, because he figured there had to be a love story involved. And so he got the green light, whatever. And so not knowing that, you know, the word comes out that there's going to be this Titanic movie. And, you know, I thought, a lot of fiction, do I want to care, you know, and, you know, because people come to me and they say, will you proofread my fictional book about the Titanic? And it's like, well, how do I fact check fiction, you know? And so I thought, you know, so people say, you're going to be involved in this? And it's like, I don't think so. Well, you know, Ken, more proactive than I was, called the production company. And he said to them, I don't know if you know who we are, but, you know, Don Lynch and I are in the LA area, and, you know, if we can help. And the lady spoke with said, we've been looking for you. And because, of course, he didn't know that they'd already, you know, had the book and that Jim had used it and everything. And so, as a result, we were hired on as I was the historian, and he was the visual historian for the movie. And that goes on, the rest is history. The nice thing is that, you know, then 5 years after Illustrated History came out, it was on the New York Times bestseller list, because when the movie came out, people were snatching it up. And Ken, again, being very proactive, and even contacted the publisher and said, look, you know, you need to print more copies because this movie's going to be big. And they didn't believe him. And then, of course, you know, there was a scramble for copies and getting more printed or whatever. So, which is all well and good. And then my second book was Ghosts of the Abyss, because Jim went back, as many of you know, all of you know, in 2001 and did a 3D IMAX documentary. We say IMAX because it's like saying Kleenex. It really is large format. And then to go in and explore the interior of the ship, which had never really been done to that extent, and never done with cameras mounted outside the submersibles, let alone 3D cameras outside the submersibles. So between the robotic cameras, the 3D cameras, everything else, you know, wonderful expedition, and, you know, kind of real highlight of my life. And so I got to write the text for Ghosts of the Abyss, and that, you know, it never went on the bestseller list, but, you know, I think visually I kind of like it better than Illustrated History. I think it's a really beautiful book. You know, Ken did a fantastic job getting the images and cleaning them up so that the interior shots that were taken, you know, look better on print. And then, but the third book that I was asked to mention was, similarly, I have a friend here, you know, many friends, but here in Los Angeles, Suzanne Cooper, one of my neighbors, had written several books for the Arcadia publishing company. And if you're familiar with them, they do local history books, like just local stuff, and they have a very standard format that they use. And she had done several like Art Deco theaters in Los Angeles and things like that, and she with a couple of others, and they went to her and asked her to do a book on the Queen Mary. And so she got her husband and me and John, who's the local historian from Long Beach, involved, and we were able to go on board and down into the archives and get a lot of good interior photos and photos of the ship, and do text and all that. So that's sort of the third book that I was involved in, that my name is on the cover. So anyway, and that I assume is available in the shop upstairs. I haven't been up there to check, but they don't seem to have it at the moment, but hopefully they'll reorder it, and it's probably available online or whatever if you really have to have one. So anyway, but that's where that stands. So anyway, so I think, were you going to introduce Judy and Ellen? And Tom was going to join us because Tom, worked on the movie and is, a lot of people want to know all about the movie, and Tom was a model builder, so he's going to join us as well.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think a lot of us have met them already this weekend, if not in the past, but if you haven't yet, two of James Cameron's 1997 film core extras, background extras who were there for months and months and months. They're in every class of the ship during the movie. Please give it up for Ellen Mower O'Brien and Judy Prestininzi. And Tom, I just met for the first time yesterday. He can tell us more about his role working on the models for the ship, or the film. And please join me in welcoming Tom Nikolai Vargas. All right, well, it's a nice little panel here. I just want to kind of go down the line. I know we've heard so many stories, and I love seeing you guys get together on screen because you start telling stories, and one story reminds you of another one, and the adventures just seem to unravel and continue. But for anyone who hasn't heard any of your tales from being on set or working on the film, we'll just go down the line, starting with Ellen. What was your favorite story from being involved in James Cameron's Titanic?
That's a darn hard question to answer because there's so many favorite stories.
Yeah.
And I think it was just the fact that I was able, I went down to apply. But first of all,
how'd you get picked? I don't want to just pull it around, but how did you find out about it in the first place?
Okay, I want to say something first, and that is that I'm taking chemo, so I may stutter and forget what I'm saying. So, other than that, we're gonna go ahead. But yes, that's a good one to say. All right, I was in between jobs at the time, and I was sitting doing some illustrations for my former boss, and I happened to hear this casting call on the radio, and I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. I've always wanted to know what went on behind the scenes, and I think this is going to be a fun time and fun way to do it. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I'm so thankful that I got into it.
Yeah.
But it was just going down, and I was just for kind of like fun that I got the role that I was using, or the.
Tell them the one role that you're the most famous for too. Maybe you would somewhere along the talk, but
Okay.
tell them that.
Okay, the first thing that we did when we got there on set was to do an indoor tank scene. It was a very large format. We were there for many hours a day for at least, what was it, about 2 weeks? 2 weeks? At least 2.5 weeks of doing this thing. And it would go from early in the morning to quite late, about 10 o'clock at night, later sometimes, right? But we did this, and it was a big tank. It was cold. Well, it wasn't really that cold. It was 84 degrees, but when you're in there for 12 hours, it's cold. And we were dividing into different groups of people. Some people were ones that had just fallen in or come up, and they were screaming for help and trying to find their loved ones. And the second group were people who had a little bit later and starting to feel the effects of hypothermia, so they were less active. And there was a fifth group of about 5 people who were dead. Okay, well, it happened, I don't know how I got this role, but I was one of the ones that was dead. And so, that's a lot of fun when you're sitting down in a tank. But anyway, So it was a large tank. The producers were in one area. I was slightly further away from them, but I was also closer to where the hot inlet, the hot inlet valve was, so I could get warm in between shots. And so anyway, most of the time all the action's up above. I was close enough, but not that close. Well, there was one time I was doing my job, and I was doing it quite well. I was playing dead. And all of a sudden I heard all this commotion, and then all of a sudden, some fool, that's a nice way of putting it, swam over me and dunked me. And so when the little horn went off in between the sets, or the takes, I stood up, raised my thumb, you know, because we were supposed to look around, make sure everybody was okay. And then the next thing I did, I was like, okay, who is this fool who did this? Well, so I turned around, and here is James Cameron and Leonardo DiCaprio. And Leo looks at me and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were real." I told him, "That's okay, I've been told I play dead well." I had been told I would play dead well by some of my other co-workers. So anyway, I thought nothing of it. Went home, got the calls, and the usual calls, you know, we want you back, we want you back. And then I got one call saying that they thought my acting was so good, they wanted to use me as a featured extra. And I'm thinking, acting? All I did was float on my back with my eyes closed, but okay.
That could be hard. That could be really hard to do for hours on end.
Apparently, but you know, it wasn't as much. But anyway, that's how I got my role of being the frozen Irish mommy towards the end of the movie. They were looking for Rose, and just before they found her, they saw me floating by holding my equally dead baby, who was actually dead even better than I was because it was mannequin. But anyway, so it was kind of a neat role that I got out of the deal of playing dead well.
And John is in the movie too, as we know. I like this icebreaker pattern of, okay, let's give it up for him. You're not excused yet. How did you get involved in the film, and how did you get the role that you played, and then one of your favorite stories?
Well, before I jump into that, I was talking to one of the other extras one time, and he said he had stood behind this lady at lunch, in line for lunch, and he said she had this dead baby attached to her shoulder, and it was so creepy. and you were the one who told me that it wasn't attached. You were afraid to put it down because it would disappear and then you'd be in trouble. And so you went to lunch with the dead baby on your shoulder. Well, and I mentioned how I got involved in the film already through the book and everything, and then the Jim hired Ken and me to be the historians, and we started out working with him on the treatment where it wasn't even a full script yet, and going through, and basically it's like the questions were, okay, if I have Leo and Rose here and I want them here, can they get there really quickly without having to climbing flights of stairs and running the length of the ship, and things which he probably kind of knew, but I think he wanted our input. And but one of the questions he did have, which he's given me credit for this, was that he said, I need to get Leo into a tuxedo. And he said, on the 1953 movie, they had a men's shop on board. Did they have anything like that on the Titanic? And I said, no, they didn't. And I said, but, Margaret Brown, I heard she had a son that age. Why don't you just have her kind of take him under her wing and give him a suit that she's coming home for her son? And he put that in, and that's how I got Leo into a tuxedo in the movie. So that's the extent of my screenwriting experience. But, so, in production though, like I provided a lot of photos of people to the casting, and because it was so detailed that they wanted to know where people were from. So if they cast a real character, they would have the right accent. And so if they were to do like, Arthur Ryerson, would he have a Chicago accent? Things like that. The Cargers from Philadelphia. And that sort of thing. And then I had little photos of people just so that they could kind of match them, because they did try to match some of the more famous passengers with actors, and then also just some costuming. Not that they couldn't do their own research, but here are pictures that are true to the period. This is what these people were wearing. And I know I worked with so that was with casting. And then I did actually say, you know, to the casting person, you know, do I get a cameo? You know? And she said, can you row? And I said, oh, of course I can, you know, I row like a sailor, you know. Probably I row like a passenger. And so anyway, but so we, you know, so I try to follow up with that occasionally. But then, you know, they would call me with, you know, questions like in the middle of the night, and they would say, you know, like, what kind of sweater was he wearing? Was it a turtleneck? You know, things like that. And I say this now, but people afterwards told me that I helped them so much, and I just don't remember being that helpful, but I guess I was. So, and I was available. You know, I mean, if they called in the middle of the night, I answered the phone, that kind of thing, because they would be shooting all hours of the day and night. And so they said that they wanted to get Ken and me in like a scene in the smoking room where we would just be playing cards with each other in the background, that'd be our cameo. And they said one of the problems we have is that, you know, we don't know from day to day what we're going to be filming, because, you know, it isn't sequential in a movie. They film, you know, whatever, whenever. And they said on the nice days we're doing our scenes, we're not doing the interiors. And then if it starts raining or it's too cloudy or whatever, windy, whatever, we do indoor scenes. And so the one friend, we dealt a lot, I wish I could remember her name, but with the lady who's sort of the PR person, and we'd always check in with her if we went down to the studio and all that. And we were allowed to come and go as we pleased. You know, Ken and I had to run to the studio. We could just come and check everything out, do whatever we wanted. And so, but she finally said, look, the best thing you can do is just take a week and come down here and be an extra. And Ed Commuta, the founder of the Titanic Historical Society, and his wife were going to do the same thing, and so they flew out. And so we took Thanksgiving week, so I didn't have to take too much time off from work, because I did have a day job. And just went down there, and then the very first day, they suited me up, and it was kind of nice because, you know, sort of the VIP guest, you know, I had a private dressing room, which was just basically 4 cloth walls, you know, but I got a private, you know, valet to get me in the tie and all this. And, you know, I used to give longer talks, but, you know, they gave me the 1912 suit and I put it on. And of course, the cuffs, you know, were all bunched up at the floor, and like the crotch came down to like my knees, you know. And I said, I don't think it fits. And they said, pull it up. And see, I didn't know this. And so I pulled the pants up to about here, and everything was where it was supposed to be. And they said, now you cover that with a vest. And that's how men wore their pants in 1912. You know, they held up with, you know, the suspenders, thank you, and or braces as they sometimes call them. And then the vest covers, you know, so that, you know, people don't know it's all the way up here, which is why we didn't know. And then the jacket and all that, everything fit fine, and so that was great. And then as soon as I was dressed, someone said, go and stand next to that little boy. And I did, and they just looked at us and said, you look like you could be his father, get up on the ship. And so we went up on the ship, and they were filming the famous photograph scene where Father Brown took a photo of Frederick Spedden watching his little son spinning a top, and the little boy's name was Thomas Fisk. And as I understand it, today he's the head of Sony Music. At Sony Studios, so he got out of acting and then got into, you know, music and stuff, and so he's had a successful career. I'm very proud of him. But anyway, so I got to be, you know, his, you know, little boy, and I mean I could go on for days about this whole thing because you know, it took most of the day to film that, and then because the ship was only one-sided, and because if they filmed from the other side, you know, hills in the background, so everything was filmed looking towards the ocean, and then they would just, you know, sometimes flip the film or whatever, but like when they wanted different takes of me doing, you know, watching him and telling him how to spin the top, I had to turn my hat around so the little bow was now on this side, and then hold my gloves in this hand instead of this hand, and you know, even though you couldn't rebutton the vest or anything, that was how they would do it, rather than have to, you know, figure out when to flip the film. And so, you know, it took most of the day. And it was interesting because then, since I was there all week, most of it after that was sitting around, but someone came up to me once and they said, you know, well, we're sorry to hear about your wife. You know, and it was like, I'm not married. And I said, well, no, we heard that that's why your wife wasn't here, because she's sick or something. And oh no, that was it. No, it was like they thought Thomas's mother was my wife, and that he really was my little boy. That was it. And I said, no, she's not my wife. And then it was, well, we're sorry to hear about your wife. We heard that she's not here because she's sick. You know, and it's like, well, I'm not married, you know. But these are the kind of rumors, you know, rumors go around on a movie set, you know, there's things, sort of things. So, but it was fun, and I used to tell all kinds of stories about, you know, the dog. You know, they filmed the dog, and, you know, someone was telling me what a wonderful, you know, little French bulldog, which there really was one on the Titanic that someone saw swimming in the water, and somebody was commenting, said, you should have seen that dog. They give the cue to start swimming, and the thing just took off across the tank like a rocket.
And I saw one of the, the dog trainer one day, and I said, it's a great French bulldog. And she said, oh, you know your bulldogs? And I said, no, I know James Cameron. It's like, it was going to be a French bulldog. And I told her about what the guy said about, how quickly it swam across the tank on cue. And she goes, oh, there was a guy under there, swimming it, holding the thing. and the sad thing is the dog did eventually die, drown. And some years later, which was too bad.
Not upset.
No, drowned in a fire, which was,
Yeah.
well,
It's either bird
well,
or
we have fires in California, and I jumped in the pool to get out of the way, and then I drowned. But anyway, but that was what I heard had happened to the dog eventually. But that was how I got my cameo, and then I had another scene that got cut on the cutting room floor. I even told Jim, after he filmed the one with the little boy, he said, you did a great job, and I said, you gonna refilm it when I'm not here? And he goes, I don't have time. But when I went in to do the voiceovers, because everything's, re-recorded, the voices, and the guy said, Jim wants a, whole paragraph. He said, because there's too much dead air. Because on camera, I just say, that's excellent, son. He said, we need to hear more, we need to hear you. And so I ad-libbed this whole paragraph, so you hear me before you see me. And so that was kind of nice that I got to have way more, verbiage than that. So that's my little tale. Anyway,
really quickly before we get to Judy, you have another really interesting connection to, historically, to that scene, or the photograph top scene with the other gentleman who's in the picture.
Edward Crosby. So we didn't realize that was Edward Crosby in the photo. In the real photo, he's sort of a hunchback. And so in the script, he's just, Arthur Ryerson. And I wish we had known, because Edward Crosby's granddaughter happened to just mention, I think when it was too late to do that, she said, my grandfather was photographed on the Titanic. And she said, you could tell it was him because of the hump on his back. He had a hunchback when he fell off a horse in the Civil War. And I was like, oh my gosh, we knew how long who that man was. We could have renamed the movie, and they could have made him Edward Crosby instead of Arthur Ryerson. But anyway, so I knew his granddaughter, but when the movie came out, she wouldn't go see it. She was too chicken, she said, to go see the movie. I was telling one of the ladies, I think at lunch, about this woman, because she was here on the Queen Mary for one of our conventions, and I'm 6'1", I'm better, she's 84, she towered over me. And so she was quite a story. She was an amazing lady with an amazing dancing career. So anyway, all right, we will move on.
I need to mention up front, Judy is not only a core background actress of the film, but she's also the author of the book, Living the Legend, the Journal of a Titanic Background Actress, and you had the foresight of just keeping a daily journal of every day on set. And not only that, but she had everyone she came in contact with sign it. So if you haven't picked up her book and given it a read, please, you're the book club, I'm sure you have. But ladies and gentlemen, Judy Prestininzi.
So Ellen and I, similar situation. We met the day we went down to do our interviews for our parts. Originally, they contacted me to be 3 days, and I was supposed to be sitting on one of the mechanical horses in the gym. And I get down there, and they go, well, we want to put you in a size 3 outfit. And I went, I've never been a size 3 in my whole life. 5 maybe, but besides that, the person that they wanted was 5'6". I am 5 feet, even. And they go, well, that's not gonna work, is it? And I go, no. So anyway, what I think really got Ellen and I to be on the whole thing, we had really long hair. And they wanted women with long hair so they didn't have to put wigs on them. So they lined us up like cattle, line up over there. So then we get the hair ladies, they're coming by and they're going, oh, and they're picking up our, oh, and, so we passed the long hair test. And Ellen and I both had classic cars. I had a 62 Chevy Impala, she had a 62 Alfa Romeo. And we took our classic cars into Tijuana on the day that we were supposed to go down to the set. And we left them there in a parking lot while they drove us down to Rosarito, and we were like, are you guys gonna have guards here? Because it was a dirt parking lot with a little rope around it. And they go, yeah, they'll have people there all day. So we came back and our car survived like we did. And I thought that was really funny. We both had 62s. And so anyway, from then on, it was just like we were together practically the whole time. And what got me into what I did in film, I was primarily, you're gonna see me in the third class dance. Jim liked to use short people for perspective, and because I was short, I got to be up front most of the time. And for Ellen, she was like, had to be farther back, and the same way with everybody else. He liked to have the shorter people up front. And so he put me right next to Kate. When the ship goes down and we come up, and she's looking for Leo, well, I'm like right there. And we actually had a hold of each other. And why they cut it the way they did, I don't know. But we had a hold of each other's life vests, and we did this struggling. And it looks like Kate hits me in the face, because I fly back like that. And you can, if you're watching that particular scene, that's me, that's pushing away from Kate. And then third class dance, we were in first class, deck close, where we ran around and around and around, and they told us, I was telling Paul, I said, they made us run around in different directions, you know, different paths, because we went around so many times, and they didn't want to see the same people running by the camera during scenes. And it's hard to say what our favorite thing was, but I really enjoyed being on the poop deck, because we were on what we called the 90-degree group, and we got picked to be on the 90 degrees. Even though we were on the bottom, there was only a few of us that got picked to do that. So we were out there, and you know, sometimes the poop deck would get stuck that way, and people were hanging from the railings on their harnesses and stuff. And we'd be down below and just laying there looking up like that. And, you know, gosh, there was just so much. There were things that were very emotional, like when the lifeboat comes back and he's looking for survivors. I literally was crying in the water when they did that. I'm supposed to be dead. And fortunately, they, you know, but that was hard when I think back about that. But and then they had our ice makeup on, and you know, we got some pictures over here with us what we looked like when we had our ice makeup on. It was just a very, I would do it again in a heartbeat, and I actually did, because when we did Ghost of the Abyss, Ed Marsh, the editor, gave me a call, and he goes, hey Jude, you want to come back down and do Titanic again? And I started laughing. He goes, no, I'm serious. He goes, we want you to be Molly Brown in Ghost of the Abyss. And I'm like, I'm there. So, and that was a little more intimate. We were down there, what, 7 days? It was a 7-day shoot. Yeah.
For the periods.
Yeah, and we got to work in a small group, all on green screen, and do Ghost of the Abyss. And so, and this is where this whole trail of relationships and friendships have developed, you know, it's been a real blessing. I'm so happy and proud to have been part of it all, or be part of it all still, really, because we keep going and doing stuff. And so with that, I'll give.
Real quickly, Judy, I'll just piggyback it. I think you're, if anybody's looking for you in this film, like the best FaceTime we get of you is right after Leo punches the guy that spills the beer. Yeah?
Yeah, well, it's a third class dance when they're actually on the well deck dancing. You can see me and I'm standing there clapping. And when Kate pushes me away at the end when she's looking for Leo there in the water.
And you're right, the way it's edited, it looks like she just
yeah.
in the face.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But you had, now you know it's me, who's that poor person that Kate shoved in the face? And she really didn't, but it really looks like that.
Right.
But it was, yeah, it was something.
Mr. Comser, it's great to meet you.
Good to meet you.
How did you get involved in Titanic?
Well, I had heard they were gonna make the movie, and I heard that they were gonna be building a lot of models for the movie, and I've been like ship model builder since I was a kid. You know, I came to the Queen Mary when I was 12, and I bought the Revell Queen Mary kit, and that kind of started my fascination with ships. But anyway, Ken Marshall, I told him that I wanted to work on the movie. I tried getting in touch with people, but nobody ever called me back. And I told Ken that I wanted to work on the movie, and he told the crew chief, Gene Rosardi, or George Stevens, there were two crew chiefs. He said, you know, Tom's at least as good as some of the other people we have working here. So I went in and I did like an interview, and they said, yeah, we'll call you when we get really busy, when we got to do the big push. And I told my boss I was going to go work at this thing. He said, well, I need to know your exact date when you're going to quit. And I said, 2 weeks from now. So then I called the movie set. I called Gene Rosardi and said, I can start whenever. I'll sweep floors. I'll do whatever. And so that's how I started. And one of the first few days when I was there was a gentleman who had worked on a lot of movies as a model maker, like Batman, some of the Batman movies, and they wanted him to do the hull detail. And they wanted to know how long it was going to take. And part of the hull detail was all the hull plates and all the rivets and all the portholes. And he said, that's impossible. It's like trying to get blood out of a turnip. And I just said, I politely waited for him to walk by and tell Gene Rosardi, you know what, I'll just do a section and we'll just extrapolate. So I got to be in charge of hull detail after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So all kinds of.
I was wondering like how a model builder gets a job. Is it more than just the interview? Do you have to show your previous work?
I came in with a little portfolio and I had some pictures of some scratch built stuff I had done. And honestly, I hadn't done that much stuff before the movie, but I was a willing set of hands. But I ended up, because I had knowledge about ships, I ended up like designing stuff and having other passing drawings off to other people to build them. Either that or they were sending me in my truck to go get some more lead or more supplies.
Some of your favorite memories from the film? Making it?
One of my favorite movies is how I got in charge of the hull detail. And another one was my boss calls me into the office, George Stevens calls me in the office, he's got a picture from Illustrated History. He's showing the part where it showed the reading and writing room with the circular windows, and he goes, we want this, but we want the starboard side. I go, this is the starboard side, but maybe I'm not telling the story exactly right, but Jim wants the other side of the ship, so we built it flat, and then Jim was really mad we didn't build it the right way, but the side of the ship they told me, which was Rob Legato, he had told them the wrong side of the ship. So we built this model, and Jim was like, what the heck is this? This isn't what I wanted. And so then we had to like redress it, you know, because Rob Legato didn't know part from starboard.
How was your Titanic knowledge or enthusiasm going into it? Had you studied it at all, or was it all brand new?
Very, very high, very high. I've been fascinated with the whole wreck of the Titanic, like my whole life, or at least from age 12. When I saw the Barbastamik movie in junior high school, I was like, oh my goodness, you know, that really sparked my interest.
And how long was the process of you guys working on that film as model makers?
As model makers, I worked on the film a whole year, from like July of '96 to July of '97, or is that right? Yeah, July of '96 to July of '97, and you know, first it was supposed to be 14 weeks, and it was supposed to be like, oh, I'll take a leave of absence. I was working at Hyatt Regency Long Beach, but I ended up working a year, and it was really fun.
Wow, very cool. Are you a Long Beach native?
I was. I lived in Long Beach for 33 years, from '85 till 2018.
Very cool. And how did you, because you're not on set every day with the actors, how did you meet and form bonds and relationships with these fine people?
Well, I was friends with Don and Ken before the movie.
Okay.
And like I met Ken Marshall on board the Queen Mary, and I'd gone to Titanic events previous to that. The convention in Boston. There was a time we went up to Santa Barbara, and I got to meet Ruth Blanchard. And she was 12 years old during the disaster, and her talking about the widows standing at the rail on the Carpathia, hoping that another lifeboat came back with their husbands, just made the disaster a little too real for me. Where before it always been like fascinating, but this is a little too real, you know. So.
Judy.
Thank you, Tom.
Oh, yes. You're welcome.
I can tell about the piece, yeah. Judy wants me to tell you about the ventilator and the motor over there, and there's a section of railing. That was, there was a gentleman named Don Pennington. I worked for Digital Domain, which was a company that was partially owned by Jim Cameron. That did the special effects, and now I'm thinking about it. But I was really had to do a lot of model stuff back then, because CGI wasn't really quite there yet. So shooting reel for reel was much more convincing than just doing it digitally in 96, 97.
Sure.
And it was funny too, because some of they were paying a lot of the computer guys a lot of stuff, and then we talk about, oh, this is stage stuff, you know. But anyway, there's so much, there were several models built for the movie, and they also built, another company called Don Pennington built a very large aft section of the Titanic, which they actually sank in a big tank, and those miniatures came from that. And we built a 45-foot model of the ship it was at the old Howard Hughes plant in Playa Vista, California. So we got to work in this great creepy old warehouse. And we built a 45-foot model of the ship, we built a model of the bow section, a model of the lounge, a model of the cargo hold. And one of the cool ones too was like a model of the corridors where the doors blow off. That was in the miniature, so.
Oh yes, I've seen behind the scenes on the DVD of the pulling the camera down that miniature hallway as the water's all rushing in.
Yeah.
So you guys made that kind of stuff too?
Yeah.
Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for me? Yes.
So, were you all interested in Titanic history before you got involved in the movie?
The question is, were you interested in Titanic's history before you got involved in the movie?
Okay, I'll start. Yes, I started, like Tom said, with the Barbara Stanwyck movie. I was like 7 years old when I saw it, and that started my fascination off with the ship. And then later on, I was able to go and get books out of the library, and also some 16mm film that I was able to rent a projector and watch those old film reels at home. So that started that, and then when Ballard said that they're gonna go out and search for the ship, we were like, I was like pins and needles waiting for each development, you know. And I was telling them earlier, you know, when the news flashes would come on, you know, I left the TV on all day, you know, because we knew that he was out there, and it was just about ready to, something was gonna happen. And, you know, the alerts would come over the, you know, NBC, you know, Bob Ballard finds Titanic, and we're like, oh, and bought everything, you know, the National Geographics and all of that stuff afterwards. And then when we found out that they were gonna do Titanic again, my son, Craig, was at school at Cal Poly, and he called me up. He was working in the print shop up there, and he was online, and he knew that I made him a Titanic fan too. And he's like, he called me up like 11:30 at night, and he goes, Mom, they're gonna make Titanic again. And I'm like, why? Because they'd already done so many. And the last one that they did was the David Jansen one, and that was like, oh, I don't think they needed to do anymore. And he goes, but your favorite director's gonna be doing it. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, you know, Jim Cameron. And I'm like, okay, you know, it's the middle of the night. And so I said, where are they gonna do it? And he goes, down in Rosarita Beach. And I'm like, why? Because I'd been there before, and I wasn't impressed with it, and I wasn't thrilled about having to go into Mexico, and, you know, so, but as we went down to the St. James Hotel in San Diego, it was built in 1912, and that's why they had it there, because it was like the first elevator in San Diego that they had brought in that year, and we went and stood in line, and we watched all these people. I mean, they went wrapped around. I didn't meet you that day. We met each other that day we drove down.
Yeah, the very first day.
Yeah, And so it was just like, you walked in, and it was like any typical, you know, they didn't interview you. You filled out a form, they took a picture of you, you put, you know, how tall you were, how old you were, you know, your measurements, so you knew what costumes. That's why I don't know how they got me into a size 3. And but anyway, that's where it all started, and I did not think that they were gonna call, because it was like August when they finally did, and we found out that there had been a delay, and when they called us up, it was like 10 o'clock at night, and my husband's like, honey, Titanic's on the phone, and I was sick in bed, and I'm like, okay, I get up, we want you down in Mexico, in Tijuana tomorrow morning at 6:30, and we don't have GPS. I lived an hour and a half away. We didn't have GPS. They said, yeah, when you cross the border, you look for the Hilton Hotel, you know, over to your right, and then you turn down whatever the name of the street was. If you go past the other hotel, whatever it was, you've gone too far. And you know, so you drive into Mexico, and you're like, okay, well, there's the Hilton, and there's the other thing, and I think we missed it by one street, or I missed it by one street, and I came back, and we parked in a parking lot called Senior Frogs. And that's when Ellen and I met. And that's where our adventure began.
And the production became kind of a family affair for you guys as well, because both of your sons were in the movie.
Well, just one son, and that was Jeff. He was up in school, and Jeff was with me on the set for the 2 weeks that we shot the Southampton scenes.
Yeah. Very
So.
awesome. And Ellen, what was your interest in the Titanic? We know dogs. Before the movie.
Well, my interest in Titanic was really formed when they discovered it down below, and that's when I became interested. A little late, you know, in the interest, but yeah, basically that was that one. Yeah, very cool. And I was really happy, and I bought every single, you know, book that I possibly could after that.
Judy talking about Senior Frogs parking lot reminded me of the bus. Can you tell me about the bus experience?
Yes. It was a school bus that we were down in, and it was for quite a while. That was our major way of coming back and forth to the set, was by taking this bus. However, it wasn't too long before I decided, no way, I'm not going to take the bus again, because you don't know when they were really going to arrive and when you're going to get there, and you're all by yourself, or at least for the most part. When you got there,
Yeah.
to this place. But, yeah, and we never went to taste any of their food, did we? I mean, I never went there to taste any of their food, so we'll never know.
Well, since you're bringing up the food, let's talk about the food on set.
Let Don talk
My,
about food. He had good food.
Our children are actors, and so we spend a lot of time on movie sets, and the food is amazing. Was that your experience?
No. Actually,
You don't know.
Yeah, actually, I like the food better than what you did. Because I was a little bit more, you know, experimental with my tastes and whatever else. But yeah, I mean, they took some good and, you know, Mexican food and tried to Americanize it, which was like, oh, please, it was really good the way you had it before. Why do you have to make it, you know? But I guess they thought that, you know, that we would like it, enjoy it that way. And so it was not my favorite cup of tea, so to speak.
There's stories about people getting sick. And
We had
I
three.
must have a lead stomach because I never got
That
sick.
might have been a piece of piece.
Don can tell us that exciting story.
Well, I can't really, but the stories about people getting sick was because when they were filming the Halifax scene, somebody laced some clam chowder with, I think, PCP. And they've never found out who did it, you know, because suddenly everybody was just a mess. And so they realized there was something in the food, and they did find eventually it was in this clam chowder, and that they kind of shut down filming that day. But that was where people really got sick, because I don't know that people got sick on the food in Mexico, but But it was interesting, because I always looked at the food in Mexico as the class system. There was first class, you know, where the main actors, and, you know, the high-end production people, like the producer and Jim Cameron or whatever, would eat. And of course, they got crab legs and lobster, you know. And then there was basically second class, which was production people. And so Ken and I were considered production people. And so we would always, you know, the first thing we do when we get to Mexico is to go and have lunch. And it would be very good, you know. But then when I was an extra, I now had to eat with the third class people, you know. And again, it was Thanksgiving week, and I've always said, you know, the Mexicans, at least those there, they'd never heard of gravy. They tried to do a Thanksgiving dinner on Thanksgiving Day. We filmed it, you know, it was on a Thanksgiving was a holiday in Mexico, and so we were filming that. But they tried to do a Thanksgiving dinner, and because there had been complaints, and they'd actually had to improve the third class food because the people were just complaining about how awful it was. And were you one of the complainers?
No, never.
Okay. You just had that look. But that was what I had heard. They'd finally been a little bit of an uprising, and that they finally said, "Okay, get better food for, you know, the extras and the people," because I mean there had been over time about 1,000 extras. You know,
over the Southampton is when it really deteriorated, because there was so many people on the set, and we had raw chicken, overcooked boiled eggs, and it was just like, okay, well, let's get one of the boiled eggs and a sack of chips, and we'll survive until we can get, you know, some fruit or something. And what they did to the fruit was terrible. They would take, you know how you slice up watermelon, and then you slice up your cantaloupe and your honeydews and everything, and they all look real pretty on the plate. Well, they took them and they mushed them together and froze them. And they would set them out for us the next day. Yeah, it was an adventure, you know, but we didn't die. Obviously, we didn't die.
Yes, we got camera.
So my question is more directed to Dawn. Is I remember in the History Channel documentary from 2005, I think it was Richie Kohler who dove down to the wreck and was making rude comments about all the plaques being left on the bridge, calling it pollution. I look at it in a more positive way than that. My question to you is what your thoughts are on that comment that he made.
Well, I mean, I won't comment about any one particular person commenting about all the plaques that were down on the bridge of the Titanic, but it did seem to be getting a little cluttered down there. And, you know, and some of them, and, you know, it's not for me to say who can and can't leave things on the Titanic, but it seemed like there were a few that were just like a little too personal, whatever, like just devoted to one person or something like that. And, you know, but again, you know, we all have our opinion because we all love the ship. And so some of us, you know, think it's nice that people are being honored in some ways, you know, even though they weren't necessarily people who died there, because obviously the first plaque was Robert Ballard's, you know, to all the people who had gone. And yet, you know, but, you know, it's a way of remembering people, I guess. And so but I don't own the wreck, so I can't say that it's good or bad, you know, to leave something down there. But, you know, I know some people feel that it was just getting a little too cluttered there, and then you just go down and sweep them all off. Because, you know, when you go down there, you really want to see the wreck. You know, you want to see what the ship would look like, or does look like now after all these years. And when you start, it's like almost going down and like, you know, leaving your trash at a park or something, you know, where you start leaving your Coke cans and your picnic baskets behind and that sort of thing. But I mean, that's an extreme, because of course these were done with genuine heartfelt concern for people or whatever. But I know there were people who just complained that there were too many plaques on the bridge of the Titanic.
I saw something. Well, Don, do you have something maybe to say about your knowledge, your time with PH?
Oh, my time with PH Nargillet, who
Yeah.
passed away with the wreck of the Titan. We worked together on, I mean, my memory of him, I probably had met him before, but my memory of him is that we did work together on, I think it was James Cameron's 100th anniversary documentary, and just a very nice man. You know, I had nothing negative to say about him at all, and just, you know, a very pleasant man. And I, you know, we didn't, I didn't get to be, super friendly with him or anything, but, I think his loss is a tragedy, as is everyone's who went down and, died in the wreck of the Titan, the submersible.
Absolutely. And touching on the whole idea of visiting the wreckage, you did 2 dives, correct?
Yes, yes.
What was the feeling the first time you saw it?
Well, let's see, you go down, and the first dive was August 27th, 2001, and I went down with Jim in Mirror 1, and Anatoly Segalovich was our pilot, and obviously it was spectacular. It would be for anybody who's into the Titanic, and you're about 2 hours getting down there. And with Jim, of course, there's a lot of camera equipment and monitors and things inside the submersible, and so I got a little tiny bench like this, which I'm happy to have, because no complaints. And the benches were sort of U-shaped, and the pilot sits in the middle one, and there's room for 3 legs, and obviously the pilot gets to have 2 legs on the floor, and so Jim, of course, took the third, had 1 foot on the floor, and I got to scrunch up, which was okay, because I could see out the porthole. I had access to my own little porthole or whatever, and the submersible is fairly thick. And so I'm really rude, because I always say, if you've ever flown the Concorde, it's the same thing, where the hull is so thick that you can't see out, but you can't look at it at an angle. You can only look straight out because it's like looking through a tube. And so, we got down there and we came to the Titanic, and instead of the bow looming up out of the darkness, we just came up to the side. And Jim just said, "Don, there's your Titanic." And we started rising up. And what amazed me, because as I said, Ken, like on the movie, was the visual historian. He knows the ship. He can tell you the circumference of any porthole and how many rivets are on this particular plate or whatever. I mean, he's, very detailed and has painted wonderful paintings. But we're rising up, and I realized I knew where we were. And so it's like, oh my gosh, this is the reception room on D-deck, and that means the C-deck, this would be the Strauss cabin. And then here, that means the Cardezas are in their cabin above that, on B, and this sort of thing. And I knew granted, some of the, the configuration of the plates and the portholes were obvious, like the D-deck doors or whatever. But rising up, I realized I knew the ship better than I thought, because I'd always studied the story and not the physical aspects of the ship, and not, how many, rungs were on this ladder or anything like that. And suddenly I recognized where we were. And that was just very thrilling for me to realize that I knew the ship better than I thought. And so my second dive was, I'll say the 2 dives. On one of them, I thought a lot as we went around about the survivors. So-and-so stood here, so-and-so stood there, whatever, and I can't remember which was which. But then the other dive, I thought a lot about the victims, like here's where the band played, and here's where the Strausses were, and this sort of thing. But the second dive then was 2 weeks later to the day, which was 9/11. And so it was Ken and me in Mir 2, and Zhenya Chanayev was our pilot, and we went down, and on the way down, Jim's brother, John David Cameron, who was on the expedition, and there's no radio underwater. You can't transmit radio signals, but it can be done acoustically, so anything transmitted we could hear in our mirror, and he was relating a message to Jim that was all in code. And we heard World Trade and whatever, a few other words that meant nothing. And apparently there was a code in the family in case there was ever a national emergency, because his brother had worked in national security for the military. And so, anyway, Jim replied, "I don't know what you're saying." He'd forgotten, enough guy. He just didn't have the code fully memorized. Apparently he did know what some of the words meant. He didn't remember them. But anyway, so he said, there's been a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, and all flights are grounded. And those 2 things seem completely unrelated. And of course we're thinking a terrorist attack like the one that was in, a few years earlier, where someone set off a bomb in the parking structure and they had to evacuate the building. But what does that have to do with grounding flights? But we were on a rescue mission because one of the robotic cameras had gotten stuck in the D-deck reception room, and it just floated up and was stuck on the ceiling. And our job in this mirror was to just motor up past D-deck, and as the current took us past, we would shine our lights in, while the other mirror would use their robotic camera to try to hook it with a clothes hanger, I think, just to pull it and then tow it out, which they did. So it was very successful, and we were very thrilled because now we rescued one of the robotic cameras, and they're obviously very critical to the whole expedition. And so, we forgot about it. I remember we did talk briefly on the way back up, thinking, what happened today in New York? That was about the extent of it. And we got up there, and when we, got out, of the submersible, of course, we're thinking about that, and everybody was like, how was your day, And it was like, well, it was exciting, we rescued the bot, we did this, we did this, it was a lot of fun, blah, blah, blah. And then after about like 5 or 10 minutes, Bill Paxton said, okay, well, he told their day and basically what had happened, which of course just, was shocking. We've never expected anything so horrific at all. And it was the strangest experience because, I had left the surface of the Earth in the submersible, and I had left the planet behind, if it was the planet I'd known all these years, and I came back to a different planet. It had changed in that one day. It just, I can't go back. I can't change this. I can't go back down there and come back to it. It's like Planet of the Apes. You can't go back into the spaceship and come back and be back on the Earth back then, kind of thing. And so it was just a thing. But as far as the dives, it was a spectacular experience. And I wish anybody could who wanted to go down there. I know people can be claustrophobic, and I was worried about that. And I'd actually asked Ed Marsh, who you mentioned earlier, beforehand, I said, I've never been claustrophobic, and I was really nervous. And I said, but what happens if we get to the bottom of the ocean and I have a panic attack? And he seriously said, the Russians keep a really big wrench. And I thought, and it's comforting to know that if there is an implosion, it's over like that, that you're not gonna suffer. And then Bill was worried about going, and he had told Gloria Stewart he was going down to the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean, and Gloria Stewart had gone off and said, you have young children at home, are you out of your mind? You're crazy. And so he was kind of nervous too. Oh, no. And so that wasn't comforting to hear that. But when I got into the submersible for the first time, and I realized what made me nervous was I didn't even know what it looked like inside there. And I got in, I looked around and went, oh, this is where I'm gonna be for the rest of the day. And then I was fine. So, and when you're underwater, it could be 20 to the surface versus, 12,000, you can't tell. And so it's dark, and when you're at the bottom, you could be at the bottom of a lake for all you know. So you don't really think about it, it's just not really it's not what you're there to focus on.
What would you say?
Just flipping back to the 9/11 story, you have a really interesting quote about just you guys who were on the dive and the astronauts were the only ones.
Yeah, I found this out later, which is really cool, to dine out on this. But one of the people on the expedition, Charlie Pellegrino, who's written several books about the Titanic, he said on that day the most remote people in the world were the 3 people in outer space and the 6 people at the bottom of the ocean. And that's kind of cool, makes me feel special, But and I think Charlie was jealous because he didn't get to dive that day, And so I think he dove the day before. But I will be honest and say I think there were probably people in the middle of the Sahara Desert who didn't hear about it for a week. Something like that. So remote is a relative term, but it was kind of an interesting way to look at it.
I remember it was like pre-cell phones, pre-internet, like I was at work, it was like 2 in the afternoon before I found out that morning.
Oh wow, yeah.
Like people we didn't have the
we had
luxuries that we have today.
Dedicated phone line in what we called Mission Control and the Keldysh, the ship, where you could just dial anywhere. And somehow they had this through some signal or whatever, and it was available to us if we needed it. And I remember like the next day, I suddenly realized I knew my aunt's phone number by heart because I had a cousin's husband who worked in the Pentagon, and I had a cousin or 2 cousins, I think, who worked in the World Trade Center. And fortunately, they were all fine. But when I suddenly realized I was going to find out, I really started to tear up because now it's like, I'm going to know whether these people are alive or not. Because at least up until then I didn't know, and I wasn't going to know until I got to land and could, but then suddenly I remembered, oh my gosh, I can remember my phone number, I can find out, and fortunately they were fine.
I imagine it's a very similar feeling to the people waiting outside the White Star Line offices. After
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yes.
Waiting to see what comes up next. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I wanted to make a comment because I'm currently a college student studying history. I would say overall, when studying Titanic or just any historical topic, it's like I pretty much have, how would you say, learned the hard way that pretty much a lot of history tends to be like a puzzle. Every piece, comes together. When it comes to Titanic in particular, I mean, it's hard to think in the moment, terms, what it must have been like to be there, and how unpredictable things were going to be. But then thinking, okay, well, we know this or that because of what Survivor said happened or whatever. Like, say for instance, Boxhall saying that he remembered hearing Alexander's ragtime band being played by the band in the lounge or whatever. So yeah, I just find it very intriguing.
Word of mouth.
I have two questions for Mr. Lynch. What would you say would be your most intense expedition to the Titanic and your biggest historical discovery at the wreck?
Well, what was my most intense expedition, I think, would be the one on
the mirror with
9/11. Yeah. And then our greatest discovery, I can't remember on my dives, a real discovery being made, but the entire Ghost of the Abyss expedition.
Yeah.
I remember on the way out there, for those of you who remember or seen the movie King Kong, it's like I felt like we were going on an expedition to Skull Island to find this ape no one had ever seen. It was like there's something out there we've heard about it, no one's ever seen. And that was how it felt, knowing that we were going out with robotic cameras to see the interior. And I think a lot of the discovery of the interior, the condition it was in inside, because the exterior had been explored and people had seen the condition, but to suddenly go inside and see where there were still remnants of furniture, and of course there were several cases where there would be a glass, still on a shelf for someone to set it down. And my favorite part of the ship to explore was the bow out at the forepeak, because it was a crew area, and so instead of wooden walls, which were all eaten away, it was mostly metal walls. And we actually got into the assistant doctor's office, Dr. Simpson, and here's his desk still intact, and above it, a shelf along the wall with all of these bottles of medicines or whatever. And the one that stood out was the bright green one, which is sort of a scalloped edge around it, which meant that you could, if you found it in the dark, you could tell by the outside that it was poisonous. And you could still see there's something white inside, whether it was arsenic or something, I don't know. But anyway, it was fascinating how intact things were after that much time. Some things, there were still fabrics in places, things like that. And so that was the greatest discovery of all, was just the condition of the inside and the fact that we could see these things.
Yes, it's kind of reminded me of a scene from that documentary where you guys discovered the stained glass and I think the lobby or
the leaded glass that's in the reception room and the dining room.
How beautiful the craftsmanship was. It's still intact and how well.
Exactly. To be in a part of the ship that's split apart and it's still intact. Yes.
That's marvelous.
And of course, then in 2005 we went back again, and then to get into the Turkish bath and the cooling room with a wonderful tile on the wall. It's still it's fantastic.
Ken was that was at the 2009 convention, that he talked for like 2.5 hours or something. He was so enthusiastic about being able to see the Turkish baths.
Yeah, there was something about seeing something that only dead people have ever seen. Realistically, it's true, because the only people who had ever seen that room had died long before we ever got there, and we were looking at something only dead people had seen. And that, it's kind of, it's kind of like the way I look at it, which is really phenomenal to me, that kind of exploration. And I wish there could be more exploration, even deeper into the ship. It would take, smaller robotic cameras and things, and a lot of money. And the person who seems to do it best is busy right now. So.
Well, speaking of him, can you tell us about what it's like working with James Cameron? Each of you? Yeah. Just run down the line.
Okay, my direct contact with him as far as working was doing my Frozen Irish Mommy routine. As far as being able to please him for my shot, it was a no-brainer. It was great, easily done. Only took 4 shots. The difference was that one time a friend of mine was at the oars. So he kind of liked to drip water on me to see if I would. And there was one time when, unfortunately, the oarsmen, because they're not looking at where they're going except for doing their job, actually accidentally hit the baby with the oar. But fortunately, the baby wasn't real, so that was okay. But anyway, it came down to it. He was very pleased and really happy about the fact that it only took 4 shots and it was done.
So he's not the monster people have described?
No, not at all. What I've noticed, because I was in a lot of different, around different scenes, he was, one scene in particular was getting to the lifeboats. He was really harsh on some of the people for doing what they were doing and doing it wrong. But finally, when it was over, he apologized and said, "You all did a really wonderful job." He was just so intense on his work that he could get carried away, and I think a lot of the people that he was working with would feel bad, but he never meant it, and he usually was always very thankful and really was really nice person to work with. At least that's in my opinion, and what I got to see.
People don't realize time is money and how much money they're hemorrhaging with every minute, every take we have to do again. And can you imagine having that pressure? Like, you're gonna talk to someone pretty sternly. That doesn't mean you're a monster.
It's true. I used to say that at the time, is to go down to Mexico and see that they built this entire movie studio for one production. And there's 1,000 people at work on one particular day. There's one guy who's in charge of the whole thing. And obviously there's different levels of management. And I just thought, how does he hold it together? How does he stay as calm as he is? And I know there's been a lot of harsh things seen in the media about him over the years, and I think a lot of them have been very unfair. And there are moments, where anybody would get cranky. But I found him to be a very nice guy. If we could sit around and have these conversations with him, you'd have the best time, because he loves to sit and talk Titanic, and just all these different theories that goes on in his head of what happened and what it caused this and that, and a lot of what you learned working on things came out working on the movie that no one ever talked about that had to be true. And the one example we always use is they used stronger davits, but they matched the davits around the Titanic, but they used stronger ones just because let's play it safe. And yet the davits would bend. They didn't just, flex. I mean, they actually would bend. And no one ever said that in 1912. And boy, if I saw a davit bending like that, I wouldn't have the lifeboat either. And it's like, and so he learned a lot. We learned a lot. But I found him just generally. I've seen him a lot over the years. He's always been very nice to me. And actually, on one of the first dive on August 27th, my one job. And so it was like, okay, here are the tape decks. When the film runs out, let me know. And so of course I have my little watch, whatever. It wasn't this one, but and all of a sudden Jim was like, "Don, the tape has run out," and I'm like, "No, it hasn't been 2 hours." And it turned out that the outside camera and the inside, tapes, had they'd started at 2 different times, and no one had told me that. And so he, for one brief moment, he was quite upset because he'd been filming with no film. And, try and do that to a director, and that's when the wrench comes out, But he just briefly, was very angry, and then he just picked up, started a new tape, whatever, and, redid it. But apparently somebody at Topside, got their head ripped off about it because I hadn't been told to watch 2 different times, and I would have, So, but I mean, well, when was the 10th anniversary of Ghost of the Abyss, he had a bunch of us all over for a party at his house. We were getting one together, and I just happened to mention it to him, and he's like, "Let's just do it at my house." And he had us all over at a party to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Ghost of the Abyss, movie. So, he's a great guy.
I was just gonna say that we're talking about how Cameron felt like doing all these things and how he did have a heart and things. That the part, what I guess sticks in my head is where he talked about things that he would have done differently now, that he certainly didn't know those things then, kind of, about how the ship broke, how many parts it was in. But the thing that sticks in my head is Murdoch's family, and that being upset about him committing suicide and shooting himself, and him saying if he had to do it again, he would not have, gone with that kind of,
he might have made somebody
artistic
else
license.
do it.
Yes.
And, you know, there's a rumor that he apologized to the family, and that isn't true. You know, he didn't actually apologize. But he did speak with a member of the family, and because we don't know that Murdoch didn't commit suicide.
Yeah, true.
There's so much evidence that somebody shot themselves. You know, there weren't a ton of people left on the ship who survived, but, you know, the word was going around, you know, that sort of thing. And so he did talk to, because there aren't any close relatives. I don't think Murdoch has any descendants. And so, but he did talk to one relative, and he explained to him, and the person understood. He said, you know, when your relative is a historic figure, people are going to make movies, and they're going to do things for the audience and not that are perfectly accurate. And that's just going to happen. And the person understood, you know, and I think the town was more upset than the Murdoch family per se, you know, and because this is like their local hero, damn it. But, you know, and I always point, there was this movie a few years ago about Sarah Winchester, the Winchester Mystery House, you know, the Winchester. And if you watch the movie, they should have named it Sarah Winchester Ghost Hunter. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And if she'd had descendants, you know, they would have been equally upset. You know, it just made her look out to be a ghost hunting idiot. And so, you know, but that happens. And so, but if he had it to do over, yes, he would have had the ship split up differently, because after going down there several years later and finding the wreckage and then viewing it himself, we realized that the breakup was forward. And I will mention briefly about that is that, you know, Ruth Blanchard, who always said that the ship broke in two and, you know, people wouldn't listen to her, people say we were among them, before they found the wreck. And she'd always talk about how it broke apart. She'd hold up, you know, 2 fingers in each hand and how they'd go apart. So in her mind, she always remembered breaking between the second and third funnel. We always thought it broke under the third funnel, and now we realize it was between the second and third funnel. We should have just kept listening to her and listening to her. You know? But anyway, so he knows that, and he might not have done, because he recognizes now that Murdoch was the one who filled the boats with more people than Lightfuller did, and so maybe he wouldn't have made Murdoch do it, maybe, you know, that sort of thing. But yes, there are things he might have done differently, absolutely.
Judy, did you get James Cameron's?
I'll wait.
We'll give everyone a chance to answer the question. Did you get Jim's autograph in your journal?
Yes, I did. And Jim called me his bloody dead chick. I was the best bloody dead chick on Titanic. In fact, I got my hat over there that I got the inscription on the back with it. Jim called me that because one day we were filming and I was up front with Kate, and he wanted to put blood on a couple of the stunt people in the back that were fighting over a barrel. And so he went through and he had his bucket of blood, and he went and he did that, whatever he did to the guys. And he comes back, and somebody was standing next to me, and I leaned over and I said, I guess we don't get any blood. And Jim heard me, and I'm like, he goes, what did you say? And I said, you don't get any blood? He goes, come over here. And he put the blood on my face. And that's how I became his bloody dead chick. And like Ellen said, if he got upset, if you had thin skin, you had people complaining. You know, it's like, he yelled at me. Well, you couldn't take it personal, you know, because he was there to do a job. And if you were in the line of fire, you were in the line of fire. And one time he had me stand behind a group of people, and he says, okay, just act like you're talking. And there were 2 men at the table. And he said, just talk, you know, so I'm moving my hand. Well, he's got the camera like right there. So from back here, you know, you see people talk with their hands like this. And he goes, stop moving so much, you're not conducting an orchestra, you know. And I'm like, okay. And you just didn't take stuff like that personal. You were there to be part of history that he was making in his mind. And so, you know, and when you were done at the end of the day, if he did get upset with you, like Ellen said, he would apologize to you and he would thank you for your hard work. I want to tell you the hardest set that we were on, and it's no lie, was the third class dance. It was hotter than heck in there. People were smoking real cigarettes, and he says that if you got them smoking, we had no air conditioning. People were getting sick and having to go outside and throw up in the trash cans.
Oh my God.
You know, it was not, you know, that was a hard set to be on. But at the end of the day, you know, the band that was there, Celtic Storm, you know, he starts playing, we will rock you. And this is at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden we all come to life and we're doing the in our third class 1912 outfits, and we're doing this in the middle of the night, and it was, that was probably the funniest part, you know, but that, you know, it was just, I remember just standing in the middle of the water one time, and Jim asked for a microphone, and he got the microphone, and he got mad. He threw the microphone and it landed right next to me, and I'm like, okay. He goes, somebody come read GD microphone that works, and you know, just stuff, you know. And then one time he was talking to the people that were rowing, and he said, my mom can row better than you do, and she only has one arm. We thought she was kidding. His mother only had one arm. She came on the set, and we saw her, and I'm like, oh my God, she really does only have one arm. And so that was, you know, we just thought he was kidding, you know, but he was not kidding. But it was an experience, and I got to work with him closely on Ghost of the Abyss. He had me do some ad-lib with Molly Brown, being Molly Brown, and I think the funniest part was I was up in a lifeboat, and I'm sitting on the bench in the lifeboat, and I'm just sitting there, and he wanted to see me. He goes, Judy, stand up. So I stood up and I disappeared because I went down, and everybody down below started laughing. I think I heard Ed. I know I heard you and some of the other people, but that was with him. He's like, get her a couple crates to stand on. and then he asked me if I was okay to be thrown into the lifeboat. And I go, you can do whatever. I said, yeah, you can throw me down in there. And he says, okay, you guys catch Judy when she gets thrown in. And I was probably, what was that, about 6 feet down? Yeah. Wow. So I was up here, the boat was down here, and they threw me in. So, you know, it was just, it's been an amazing time. And it's been, because we're recreating something, and I told other people, you know, it's not like we were there just to make a movie. We were recreating history, and I was glad to be a part of that.
Well, I was definitely like second unit, but I did have some encounters with James Cameron. The best was when one time I was in the set with Don and Ken Marshall, and hearing him talk about the wreck and how the ship sank, and he had things figured out that Don and Ken Marshall had been thinking about for years about how the ship broke up. And I just felt like I was in the presence of a very intelligent person. And also they told me if he's, you know, because he'd also come by where we were making the movie, making the models. And I was told if he asks you a question you don't know, do not make stuff up. You know, answer honestly, I do not know, I'll get the answer for you. And he had been there, I'd seen like out of the corner of my eye when I was working on other stuff, they were pre-staging with miniatures how they were gonna film the movie. So they had like this pretty basic model of the Titanic set with all these crane models. And one of the art directors said, I think we're making a model about cranes when you got into the set in Mexico. But, one interesting encounter was I was walking down a hallway and there was a meeting and I heard him yelling at the top of his voice, I did not go to the bottom of the effing Atlantic Ocean for you people to make things up. But all my own, you know, I had minimal interaction with him, but I was in the room with him several times. Very talented guy.
I was just going to mention,
just since Tom was here. But there was a time you and I were down there on the set, and he was having dinner in his trailer, and he just called us in to watch the dailies with him, you know, and
That
he
was
said,
fantastic,
yeah, it was funny, he just invited us both in to see them, and I think he remembered you because, you know, when he had a screening at Lightstorm, and they were only inviting key people, because they only had a small screening.
I remember that, yeah.
And you happened to be up at my house that day, and I said to the person on the phone, I said, well, my friend Thomas here, he worked on the movie, he was one of the model makers, and we got the okay, come on over, see the screening, and it was like our very early version of the movie, so it didn't have all the digital stuff in, and it had extra scenes that ended up being cut out because it was even longer than what you saw in the theater, but you know, he was always nice, he remembered people, and he was always great.
Well, yeah, his obvious strength is he knew how to hire the right, he knew how to hire the right people, talented people who could get the job done, and,
Did you have a question tonight?
Oh, yes, one question. I've heard a lot that the Titanic's center propeller was three-bladed. Is that true?
Oh,
of course.
okay, how many blades on the center propeller? This has been a big issue lately
Yeah.
because we always had the photo of the Olympics, which I believe was it three-bladed?
Four-bladed.
Four-bladed, okay. And so since then, they have found records at Harlan and Wolff that apparently the center propeller on the Titanic was three-bladed. And it's interesting because one of the things historians and people like Ken who studies the ship found is that anything that was different between the Olympic and Titanic, the Olympic was, when during its refit the next year, was upgraded to in a lot of ways. Like, you know, the kennels on the Olympic on the plans were always down on E deck or F deck or whatever, and yet we believe that they were on the boat deck, and people have done more study about it. And then they found out that when they refit the Olympic, they did move them up to the boat deck there. And so, and then they did put on, three-bladed propeller on it later, as I recall. And so, and just other features as well. And so, so that's always a good indication of what the Titanic had. If the Olympic was in with it later, that probably was already fitted on the Titanic. But they did apparently find at Harlan and Wolff the records of how many bladed propeller they actually used on the ship.
Do you think there's still any archived photographs of the Titanic at dry dock or any kind of construction photos?
Oh my gosh, if we could find more photos, and I wouldn't doubt that they're out there because they turn up occasionally. Like there was that one family in Belfast that had an album of photos from when the launch was. And then one lady wrote a book about the Caldwells, and it turned out that the Caldwell family, somebody came down and saw them off and took a photo of them on the deck, and I didn't even know that until that book came out. She found it under her, with her uncle's things. And it's very possible that there are things out there, and I think there's always something to be found. And an example, like I mentioned earlier with my friend Andre Presley, when she just suddenly told us one day that it was her grandfather who was in the Father Brown photo, the little boy with the top. And so things like that will come out, because there's a photo he took of this one couple on the deck, and no one's ever come forward and said who it is. Well, the family probably doesn't know, we're all dying to find out. They may know, and they might have even had the photos. So things come out, and there may be photos that somebody has, and they didn't realize what they were. There could be an archive somewhere. It's amazing the stuff that does turn up occasionally. And one of the examples I gave was that, you wouldn't think you could do it, but, I tracked down one of the surviving dogs one time, and retired out here to the desert, and then ran away later or something, went missing. But it was funny because, we'd always like, what happened to the dogs, And now, just recently, we've found that we think there was a fourth dog that survived. And so, things still come up,
Why preserving history is important.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, along that line too, I kind of talk about the Goldenrod books, the first book, from back then, from 1912, that everybody and their brother seemed to have one, because it was the first one. But I also feel like they kept them. And I said, I put it kind of like, almost like a Bible, that people did not want to give it up. There was something sacred about the book, where it would end up in the attic, it ended up in the basement, but people would not, they kept it.
Yeah,
Like
the Marshall Everett, Logan Marshall book, it's all the
Yes.
same guy.
Yeah.
Then he'd just throw all these newspaper accounts together and come out with a book.
Yeah.
And he did it after the Lusitania, after the Empress of Ireland, after the San Francisco earthquake. But yeah, families kept those. There was something about the Titanic that just made people want to hang on to this. And there's a great story where Marion Wright, one of the survivors, she, because they would sell them door to door. And this man came to her door after the Titanic disaster and selling it, and she said, well, I was on the Titanic, and so he gave her one and said, I want to come back and I want your opinion. And then he never came back, you know. And there's a photo of her 50 years later holding the book, you know. It's like, it still had it. She kept it, he never showed up.
So, someone asked earlier a question about Murdoch and, you know, how he was given a bad rap and all that stuff. So, I watched a video a while back about Quartermaster Robert Hitchens' family speaking out against the bad reputation he was given and speaking out against Molly Brown and her family. And basically, you know, he said, she said, you're the bad guy, no, you're the bad guy. So I guess my question to Don is whether or not Robert Hitchens deserves to be vilified the way he is usually, whether there's justification or not.
Well, when Margaret Brown wasn't the only one who said that he behaved badly, that Robert Hitchens behaved badly, and Arthur Cushman, because that was pronounced, he testified at the British Inquiry, or the American Inquiry about it, and said that, you know, he didn't, you know, behave too well. And I think Mrs. Meyer said in the press the same thing, that, you know, he, you know, was hogging all the blankets, drinking all the liquor, whatever. And so, did I touch a nerve? I'm sorry. But anyway, so I don't think I mean, he's the only one that people really spoke that way about. And yet, like in other lifeboats, they didn't go back either. And yet nobody complained that the guy was like, you know, bad-mouthing the victims, you know, it's our life now, not theirs, they're a bunch of stiffs, anything. So I think that Robert Hitchens didn't behave as well as other people did, and maybe it was exaggerated a little bit, it could be, and I'm sure the family likes to think that, you know, it wasn't as bad as they made it out to be. But, you know, I think Hitchens was eventually arrested for attempted murder or something later in life, and so, you know, he had a lot of, you know, emotional issues throughout his life, which may have been guilt after the Titanic. It may, you know, he might not have been that way if he hadn't been through this horrible disaster, and it could have been a little PTSD thing or something, you know, we can't really say. But I do believe there is something to the fact that he didn't behave well in Lifeboat 6. I really believe there is. And just by the fact that he never turned the tiller over to a woman and helped pull an oar when they only had 3 men, one of whom had a broken arm, you know, in the lifeboat, and, you know, that he wouldn't even do that. So, I mean, I think there's something to it.
Did anybody ever go after J. Bruce Ismay for being so pushy about trying, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he try to pressure Captain Smith about getting the Titanic to its destination at an earlier date?
Well, Bruce, yeah, Bruce Ismay, oh, I'm sorry.
And of course he left and abandoned his ship and everything with all the people. Did he get any kind of accountability for that kind of action, abandoning the ship and being so pressurizing with time and being so arrogant with the ship?
Well, there's several issues there with Bruce Ismay, and it's a complicated issue.
Yeah.
And, you know, I believe Smith felt pressured because there is Mrs. Lyons overhearing him, you know, telling Smith, and not ordering him to go faster, but acknowledging that at the rate they were going to beat the Olympic and get into New York Tuesday night. And they would have had to slow down significantly to not get there Tuesday night. And so, you know, I think he was excited about it. I think Smith recognized that he was excited about the progress they were making. Smith did let him know that they were in the ice region, because he told Mrs. Ryerson, because she said, what are you going to do? What are they going to do about this? And he said, well, we're going to put on more boilers and get out of here, kind of thing. And so, but what a lot of people overlook, and Bruce Ismay admitted this, is that he had the chief engineer to his cabin privately without the captain to discuss when they were going to really open her up and try the engines. And he testified later that he planned on doing it Monday. But I think that was just to cover his behind, because we know on Sunday the engines were going faster than he planned the voyage. So I think he told Bell, on Sunday, let's really open her up. And didn't even discuss it with the captain. And so Bell at least did it, you know. Now maybe he went to the captain and said, Mr. Ismay wants to do this, and the captain said, sure, knock yourself out. I don't know, you know, because you know, all the key principal people are dead. But as far as any repercussions afterwards, they really couldn't prove that he had any influence over Smith. And so there were no real repercussions, and just getting into the lifeboat where there was room was more of an honor thing rather than a legal thing, so there wasn't much they could do. But he did suffer for the rest of his life from this, obviously. And in fact, one of the ladies who used to come to the Titanic Historical Society conventions was a cross-channel passenger, and she knew his sister. And one time, his sister invited her to have lunch with her and her brother, and it was Bruce Ismay, and she said, I never mentioned that I had been on the Titanic, even if it was only for 5 hours. She just knew it was not the thing to bring up, and so she just kept her mouth shut, because she didn't lose anybody. It was a little traumatic as an 11-year-old to get off the ship and then a few days later find out that all these people you had met had died, but she wasn't going to bring it up to him. So I think he suffered personally and privately. But they're a complicated, as many families are, they're a complicated family. There's a wonderful book, and I can't remember the woman's name, it's an Italian name, but it's her married name. She's a member of the family, and apparently an Italian famous art historian or something, and she's a member of the Ismay family, and she wrote a book some years ago. It's very expensive, and I got it at the time, unfortunately. But he apparently fell in love with Mrs. Thayer, and the Thayers kept his letters to her, and and I think she finally had to sort of cut it off because, of course, her husband had died in the Titanic disaster, and she's getting these, practically love letters from this man who was, the president of the company. And, but this woman also talked about what it was like growing up in the Ismay household. And for example, they had a child who died at birth, I think. And the thing was, they were at his parents' home. And when his wife started going into labor, the parents called the carriage and sent them home. They didn't just say, oh, quick, get your wife upstairs, that kind of thing. It was just, oh, you're having a baby, get out. They just sent her home, and then she lost the baby. So, they're the Ismay family, and then one of the examples I also talk about is apparently Bruce Ismay, people of his stature did not take public transportation. A lot of well-to-do people would back then, but if you were at that level, you did not. And he liked to take a newspaper and ride the streetcar through an entire circuit, so he could just be by himself, away from everybody, and read the paper without being bothered by the people at the office, stuff like that. And he carried baggage from his father. That's why several people on the Titanic said he was never wearing a hat, which is unusual. And it's because his father had embarrassed him once about wearing a hat. He hung it up in his father's office when he was an apprentice, which he'd always done growing up, but now he's an apprentice there, and his father made a big public display about, get that apprentice's hat out of my office, and this kind of stuff. So he carried baggage. They're a complicated family, he's a complicated person.
Of course.
I don't know how much time we need to set up for the next.
6. It starts at 6:30.
Oh.
How much time do we need before we?
It shouldn't take very long because it's already up, so.
And it starts at 6. 6:30, okay, great. So it should probably- Yeah.
Tom, can you share with the group and the watchers, what sparked your interest in Titanic history? And we know that you went and had a lot of survivors, what initiated you to want to do that, to learn their stories?
Well, I'm a people person, but I think I was always interested in the Titanic growing up, and it's always in the back of your head. And then, I saw the 53 movie on TV as a child, thought it was cool, but I remember going to school on Monday and everybody was like, did you see Titanic on TV on Saturday? So all the kids thought it was cool. But in 1973, I saw the Poseidon Adventure and thought it was a really cool movie. I think it holds up well on the big screen if you watch it on TV. But anyway, and I thought, well, what real shipwrecks are like. So I went to the library, checked out some books, and one of them was A Night to Remember by Walter Lord, and that grabbed me more than any of the other books, the other shipwreck. And so I, read it again the second time immediately, and then joined the Historical Society and started doing research. And I got every back issue of their magazine, The Commutator, and they had always made survivors honor members. In fact, when the society was formed, it had more survivors as members than regular people, most of normal people, but anyway, they, so I thought, well, what happened to these people? Because, when the society was formed in '63, a lot of them would have been in their 60s and 70s, why weren't they around? And come to find out, nobody really made an effort to try to find them, and so a lot of them by now, by the time the 1970s and 80s, many of them are gone, but, I did find a number of them, and they joined the society, and then would start coming to the conventions and things like that. And the two I knew best are the two, well, they weren't the only ones here in Southern California, but turns out the two in Long Beach I never even met. They were living here when I was in Southern California, and I didn't know that. But was Edwina Trout, who lived in Hermosa Beach, and then Ruth Becker Blanchard, who lived in Santa Barbara. And Ruth just gave, she was the best for as far as detail and everything. She remembered everything, and her story never changed. And she appreciated, because she didn't really talk about it until we got a hold of her. And when I told her that, your mother saved more children than anyone else, because the most children saved in any one family were 3, and her mother and a lady in 3rd class each saved 3 children, and bigger families were lost or split in half. And that really hit her, because she didn't know that, and it really kind of hit her, and she took it to heart. And she thought about it more in her old age, and would say, I realized how everything was like clockwork, the way when we got to the cabin, we got up, she was sent back to get blankets. When she got back to where their family was right when these men came to take them up to the boat deck. They get to, boat 11, and the smaller children get in just in time before it starts to leave, and her mother has to jump in, and then she gets in boat 13 right before it starts lowering. And then boat 15 came down on top of it, and they got out just in time, and she just said everything. It's like clockwork, she really thought about it a lot. And then the other one, Edwina Trout, the beauty of her was that she was an adult, which was wonderful, because we didn't have a lot of adults from 1912 left when I was into this. And so she booked her own passage, she was alone, and she could tell you the thought process that she went through, which most people sit there today and say, well, why didn't so-and-so get into a lifeboat? And we said to her one time, why did you wait till the last lifeboat? And she said, well, when a ship sank, you died. Because they didn't know that if you got into a lifeboat, you were going to survive. I mean, she grew up in the era before radio, and in her lifetime, when ships sank, everybody died. And so she figured, why go down? And I didn't realize till I went to the Belfast Museum, where they have a recording of her talking about it. And, she was very devout. She was Catholic, and so she had been to confession, she'd been to Mass, and she'd had communion that day. And I call it the trifecta because I'm not Catholic, so I don't know, there's a word for it. But everything was in place, and then that night the ship hit the iceberg, and she could die because she'd had communion. She'd been to Mass, she'd had said confession. And she did tell us, Ken and me, she said that she stood on deck and she thanked God that he was going to take her life in such a way that her parents wouldn't have to pay for a funeral. And
Wow.
See, I get choked up too. And so, anyway, so she was wonderful to give you some of those thought processes and the things that she went through, and she could remember that, and she remembered so well right up to 100. And to really, get things out of her as far as little details and things like that. But she was also a wonderfully fun lady, just the sweetest lady. And both of them were really very, very nice. And so I'm glad I got to know them better. I wish I had known others better. Mrs. John Pillsbury Snyder, a first-class passenger who lived in Minnesota, talked to her a few times, but if I had lived closer, I would have loved to have really just, because over time they said to remember more. And Edith Haseman over in England was wonderful. She was 15 at the time. And Eva Hart was a lovely lady. Everybody wants to believe everything she said, but Eva loved the attention, and she'd tell you whatever you wanted to hear. And so you couldn't believe everything Eva said. But as a person, she was just delightful. I mean, when the camera was turned off, she was the nicest, sweetest lady. But when they were turned on, boy, that back would stiffen, and stuff. And she was in charge of this interview, and she, you were going to tell her. But she was an entertainer when she was young, so she'd tell you, they show business, she'd give the audience what they want. So suddenly she had these incredible memories. And she wanted to be the only one who remembered. My favorite quote from Eva was, one time she was saying, well, I must be the only one who can remember it. And I said, well, there's Edith Haseman down in Southampton, was 8 years older than Eva. She goes, Edith Haseman can't remember anything. She's arthritic. So, but Eva, when the cameras are off, Eva was very, very sweet. So I wish I could have been around some of these people more, to where you could, I spent the time with them like I spent with the ladies here. I got more memories out of them as time went by. But best I could.
20 survivors?
Probably about 20, I think, well, including the lady who was the cross-channel passenger. So I didn't get to speak to any crew members. They were gone before I ever got to England to get over there. But yeah, it's about that many.
Well, we're running short on time here. Does anybody have any final questions, thoughts?
What do you think about people like us?
For everyone at home, the question is, what do you think about people like us?
Sounds like a William Shatner moment.
There are people like you. We're interested in the Titanic. You know, it doesn't. You know.
So why do you think the lore keeps drawing people in?
What I always talk about, what really attracts people, and it's hard to define, but you know, there's something about the story that will surely never be repeated. You know, the biggest ship in the world, they call it unsinkable. It's on its maiden voyage. It's full of all these rich and famous people, and then it hits an iceberg when it's supposed to be unsinkable, and then it sinks so slowly that all this drama is to be acted out. And I think that fascinates people, you know, but then some people, the fascination is like the way the ship broke up, you know, and it's the ship itself. They don't care about the people on board and their stories. And other people, it's all about their stories, and, you know, because you take a random group of people and, you know, they're fascinating things that happened in their lives versus some of them were just, you know, very ordinary people and, you know, went on to lead, you know, ordinary lives except to have this trauma in their background or whatever. And it's just, it's hard to explain, but I think you know, nothing since then. I personally do appreciate the sinking of the Andrea Doria, because there's an 11-hour sinking, so a lot of drama there and everything. And some of the situations that those people were in was pretty, you know, incredible. And so, you know, but we'll just never see something like that again, I think. And that's why even now, after all these years, when all the survivors are dead and everything, people are still so fascinated. Because certainly, you know, tonight, we're not the only group to get together, you know, in the world. You know, there are different gatherings around the world to commemorate the anniversary. So, you know, but it's a nice crowd. You know, it's like, you know, I think, I will say that, you know, being on Facebook, you know, you'll find some difficult people, and I've been called one of them, and, you know, Lord knows I have my side, but I tend to find that those people don't come to things like this. You know, very often, you know, the people who come to this like the camaraderie, you know, and appreciate the interesting story, and, you know, and don't really, you know, have sort of the hostility towards, because some people, I mean, the comments some people make about how all those people in the first class are rich and deserve to die and stuff like that, and it's just nonsense. You know, there's no reason to make a comment like that. You know, that's just inexcusable to talk about human lives like that. And those people don't come to these, you know. And so when we get together, you know, I always enjoy it because, you know, it's always a nice crowd of people.
There is a group that's that's doing the same type of thing in Belfast.
Yes, yeah. I think the British Titanic Society is meeting in Belfast.
Yeah,
this year.
Linda McElwain and Maureen too, I think, Maureen McKinney.
Because I think that'd be Belfast and British societies are together.
Oh, they're having a joint
Yeah,
event, okay.
they're doing something together this year.
Nice. Oh, good for them.
Yeah. Any final thoughts from the panel?
You ask what we think of you. It's like, I think you're great. I mean, we have stories that we can share that you want to hear, and then we get to hear from you when you come and talk to us. You know, it's not just all about us, it's all of us. You know?
I wish
mean,
everybody here could have had the experiences that we
Yeah.
had, you know, because you would appreciate it too.
Yeah, and that's what I like to impart to the experiences. It all wasn't fun, it all wasn't glamour, and we weren't, I mean, there were people down there that just didn't know, you know, anything about Titanic. I was telling this young man last night that there were people down on the set that thought Titanic got sunk by a torpedo. And we're like, how can you be 40 years old and not know how Titanic sank or what Titanic is? You know, or you've never heard of it. And I have a friend that, you know, just for an example of not knowing things, you know, the bridge that got knocked down, yeah. Well, 2.5, 3 weeks later, this friend of mine is in Oregon, had never heard of it, didn't even know about it. he goes, what are you talking about? Because we have another friend that lived back in the area, and I asked her if she was affected by it, and he said, what bridge? When? You know, it's like, where have you been? You know, and you know, I guess facts just don't stick with some people too. So, but I think groups like this is fantastic, you know, because we get to tell our experiences that you never knew, would never know.
Well, I always tell people too, how wonderful it is to be around other people that are interested in the same thing you are, and you don't have to explain your passion, your mania. I say it's kind of like the chess club at school. It's like, in your group, you know, you're all great, and chess is wonderful. The rest of the school is laughing at you. But in your world, you know.
And we all feel comfortable about telling each other about ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, so. Do you have any? Oh, okay.
I have a real quick funny story. We started the model shop before they started filming in Mexico, and we're doing the plating on the side of the Titanic, which is a lot like the plating on this ship, where it's like, it's not just flat welded together, it's all these very careful rows of steel that are like almost like fish scales. And the art director, was it Peter Lamont?
Sounds right.
Well, anyway, the art director, he sees me doing this on a mock-up that we're going to do on the model, and he says, prove to me this was on the ship. I'm like, really? And so I got him pictures, because he was going to have to reproduce it full size in Mexico. So, all the complicated detail of the ship in 1912.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky they had you.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, honestly true. That's
Well, they had Ken. But
yeah, they had Ken, but, you know, I mean, Ken was also, I always hate to talk about like Ken or Jim, because it's not right for me to speak for other people. But no, Ken didn't go down being extra because he also had other projects he was working on.
Yeah.
And so he always regretted that. And so, like for Ghost of the Abyss, you know, he basically said to Jim, you know, I didn't get to be an extra in Titanic. Can I be Bruce Ismay in Ghost of the Abyss? And Jim said yes, absolutely. And then he turned to me, and I'd already been an extra. I'd been in a movie, and I didn't need to be in another one. I thought, I'll just watch them film. I have fun doing it. And he turned to me and asked if I would be Thomas Harris. You know, how do you say no to Jim Cameron? Yeah, it should be in his movie. You don't say no.
And when they're dressed up, I mean, you saw the end results. I mean, it's like, that's really weird.
Well, and back then I could fit in Victor Garber's clothes, so I was wearing the same clothes that Victor Garber wore in Titanic. So wouldn't be today.
Did you keep anything from set?
Not from set. I contacted the company that made all the chairs in Mexico City, and my dining room chairs matched the third-class chairs for the movie, because the wood in my dining room is dark, so I didn't want the first-class ones. So I got the swivel kind, you know, that would have been mounted on the floor, because they only had like 4 or 5 on the set, I think.
Yeah.
And actually, when you see the one in the, you know, handcuffed to that pipe, and you see one floating in the room, and when it's flooding, they weren't supposed to float, they were supposed to go down to the floor, you know, so there's a little flaw that nobody talks about. But, and then Tom gave me a few pieces, like I got a piece of hull plating from lead, things from this.
Recycled, so we saved it.
Yeah, and that's about all. I mean, because I didn't take anything. It was funny because I think I should take something. And then, I'd leave, and it'd be the one time they wouldn't check your car, know, and it's like, I could have put a chair back the day. And so I didn't really say anything, but, with all the memories and everything, it's like, I am okay. I'm happy that, with a few things I have.
They had to protect it so they could scrap it and put it in a pile in someone else's yard.
Exactly, yes.
Judy, can you tell us about your collection?
Well, I was fortunate enough to get those pieces over there, and I also had smoking room pieces that the individual that you bought your wheel from bought from me.
That's the ship saying, no, I don't know that guy.
So
that doesn't mean time's up.
And I have a newel post, it's about this tall, and I think Jim actually identified where it came from on the staircase, and we found that in the pile, and I restored it, and it's at home, but it's really kind of fragile to just like transport all over the place. Because I thought about bringing it, and I'm like, well, how would I even get it up here? Because I knew the layout, and if I had a dolly and all that stuff. But then we have, Ellen kept her blanket, which I should have kept mine, That was a Titanic blanket right there that used on the set. We have a White Star Line sweater that Park Stevenson gave to me. And I also have the Carpathia blanket that Ed Marsh gave to me. And then we have a bunch of other little things, you know, all kinds of stuff at home, and that I got plates, I got the ticket, and you know, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was the only thing that I wish I'd have done, is roll up my blanket and brought it home. Because they didn't offer anything to us. They didn't say, hey, you know, you keep your life vest, you know, that you wore for 4 or 5 months, you know, go ahead. But because nothing was really assigned to us. The life vests, we'd turn in at night, and sometimes they would get so moldy. They took them out one day and hung them on a line and spray painted them white. And so, and then, you know, by the time we were done with all the water and everything, a lot of them just got trashed. And then there were some that were soft.
Those were like the ones that were the stuff. Those were the ones that the stuff crew used. Yes. They were going to be doing a lot, and I liked using them because they had zippers. And now the clothes that we were given, you and I, we both had the same problem.
Yeah.
Had no pockets at all, and you were out there. You know, you'd like to have something to eat or something, you know, nibble on, or whatever.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Journals.
Anyway, no, I'm losing it. But anyway,
Our pockets.
yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, yeah, they were perfect. Besides which, a lot of times we had a lot of time to sleep. And it was much more comfortable to sleep on those life vests than the one that had the styrofoam in it. So, you have to help yourself sometimes. Too.
Yeah.
Yes. But I also, there were a few things that I bought. I have let's see, a window that's stained glass in actuality, but it just had clear panes. And I bought that one from some of the sellers that were down on the street. And right after the set, I guess they helped take it apart and they decided to sell these. So I bought that one, and it's really cool. I'm anxious to get to use it again. I also, we found out where the dump was. Now, unfortunately, I don't think that anybody realized how famous this movie would be and how all of these pieces from the set could have been something that they could have made a lot of money. But I did find out where, I did find out where they were dumping a lot of their stuff. So I found out a little late, so I couldn't get all of the things I would have liked to have, but I do have a lot of bits and pieces and things from the set that I found in the dump.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of a fun thing to do.
It's like the notebooks.
Right, and then I do have, I don't do nothing that I probably shouldn't have done, but it's okay. I wore a pair of shoes on the set, and I knew that they were not old antiques or vintage pieces, because I had actually gone out to the store just before signing up for Titanic, and I wanted to buy in the store a white version of the same shoe, but it was white. Well, all of the ones that they have there that they use in the set were white too, but they painted them black. And so I decided that I would just borrow those. I mean, nobody else was going to wear them.
Yeah. And of course, they took all of our clothes back. You know,
they did do that, and that was kind of a sad thing, because I was willing to actually purchase one of the first class lady outfit that I wore, and of course they said, no, we aren't going to do that, and they shipped it off, and I've never been able, I found the company that supposedly had them, but no, it was not there, that nobody had them, I couldn't ask to buy or rent or whatever. So, there you go, that's it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in saying thank you to our panel here today, Tom, Judy, Thank you, Joe, for this opportunity.
And thank you for hosting.
My pleasure, and I guess it's time for the next live stream, yeah?
And now I feel good about being able to list my house and borrow those 2 items.
Yeah, so we have a little break if you want. I'm gonna jump into the
So the Titanic Book Club is having a live stream, and they watched this live stream. So I told them I'm gonna jump in and say hi to them.
For 3 hours. I can't sit 6 hours.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, you guys look amazing. Yeah, you were sharing that in the Titanic. Oh, wait, picture. They were sharing that in the. Oh, I want to do that too. Oh, sorry, guys. I just dialed into the, so the book club watched our event on Zoom, so I just dialed in. So I thought maybe you guys could say hi.
Yes.
They can see you, let's see. I know, so there's other book club members, I don't know if they can.
Are we live stream after this? For how long?
No, we're here till 10.
I mean, we're leaving, we're going to eat. There's no, this is like church.
Yeah.
This was good, but I can't sit for 6 hours.
Yeah.